I'd like to welcome you all on this rather dismal-looking Wednesday morning. I think we've got I wouldn't say a hot program, but I think we've got an interesting program to keep your attention. My name's Richard Wells. I'm from the University of Waterloo. I'm a faculty member there, and I'm director of a Centre for Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders, which you can tell I've practiced a couple of times. And our goal at the centre is to work on questions around prevention of MSDs with workplaces, in construction, in transportation. And transportation, obviously, is what we're talking about today. The reason we're here today started about 3 years ago. And the impetus for that was the increased attention being paid to MSDs, both within the province of Ontario and through the Federal Labour Code Part 2. And so we collaborated with the Transportation Health and Safety Association to see what advice, what help we could give to the trucking sector to try and address musculoskeletal problems. So the arc of the project has been that we have been working both with Transportation Health and Safety Association. We've been working with a number of companies who you will be introduced to in a little while. And we've also been working with other researchers in our network of researchers. The project has been to look at the general trucking and courier area. We had to bite off one piece. And that was my introduction to the trucking sector. Before that, there were things that passed me on the highway. As I got into it, I realized the complexity, the difficulties, and the challenges that faced the industry, and the skill and goodwill of all of the people I had met in it. So I've now made a lot of colleagues, and I know a lot more about it. So I look now at trucks on the highway with a completely different eye. So personally, that's been a very interesting journey for me. The project's goal here has been to work with companies, and we've been working with 6 companies who you'll be introduced to in a little while. And with those companies, we've been developing what we call cross-functional teams, which is drivers, people from maintenance, from union, and to try and address and look at what are the tasks, jobs, activities that have high risks for musculoskeletal disorders, that give rise to concerns that are associated with injuries, and try and do an analysis of those to try and find out what are the root causes of those problems. And then to come up with countermeasures that the companies then look to how those could be implemented. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize that we'll be looking at more this afternoon is the notion that there are many, many ways in which you can address prevention of musculoskeletal disorders. So we could look at drivers. Then there's the company. What can a company do to help prevent them? What can a manufacturer of trucks do? What can the customers do? And what can regulators, trucking associations do? And so musculoskeletal disorders are not a simple thing to solve. There's no single magic bullet. And so we've been looking at a whole layering of countermeasures, as I said, from regulation all the way through to what drivers can do. And so I'd like you to hold that thought as we move into the afternoon, when we start looking at countermeasures, because we've got to look at a whole range of factors. Why a conference today? We've been working in this area now for just over 2 years. And although I'm going to disappoint you here and say we don't have all the answers, we do have some, and I think we've identified some ways forward. And so the purpose then of the conference is to say, what have we learned? What are the issues that have come out? What kinds of solutions, what kind of approaches have we found? And also to, I think generally, just move us down the road to zero. How do we start moving within this sector to help try and prevent musculoskeletal disorders? I'd like very briefly to introduce you to the package that I think all of you have. I would add that all of the material that you will hear and see today will be put on the web. So you might notice at the back that we have a video going, and this video will be on the web so that you can review the materials, or others in your organizations can review the presentation. All the presentations will be on the web. All of the materials coming out of this conference will be on the web in the end. I would draw your attention to one thing, which is the brochure describing today. It should be nice and obvious at the front of the package. And I'd just like to very briefly run you through what we have planned for you today. After I've just oriented you to the day, Michael Burke from THSAO will be introducing our opening speaker, Steve Mahoney from WSIB, who supports not only THSAO, but also CRE-MSD Center of Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders. We're then going to have a look at some activities that have been identified through the project through my colleague, Dr. Marty Fraser, who will give us some idea about what are the challenges facing drivers and people in the industry in terms of injuries and musculoskeletal disorders. After our break, and we've given us 30 minutes break here because we know that on a first break everyone meets everyone they haven't met for a while, and so we always think that a first break is a great networking session, so we've given you 30 minutes there. After that, Dr. Matt Reed from the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute will be telling a little bit about what's happening south of the border, in particular about the design of trucks, cabs, and how to make ingress and egress safer, and other issues that have come up with there. So we're not alone in the world in looking at these issues. I don't think anybody has solved them, but I think there's a growing interest and attention being paid to musculoskeletal disorders in the sector. After Matt, we're going to hear from Dr. Vic Kelnis from Queens, who's going to talk a little bit about the economics of the situation. And as I'm sure all of you know, musculoskeletal disorders are a large part of compensation costs and also human suffering in most sectors today in Ontario. After our lunch, then we're going to be introduced a little bit to both the federal and the provincial legislative areas. And what we want to try and do there is to show you at least how the activities that the countermeasures that we're going to be talking about throughout the day can be, how they integrate with the legislation. And I'm looking forward to finding more out about that. The very last part of the day, which is more active, is going to be around looking at the issues that we've brought forward. And so for each one of these issues, we've developed a worksheet and some of the countermeasures that have come out of our cross-functional teams that they've brainstormed and that have come out of our review of the literature. And what we want to get out of your heads is some idea about which one of these do you think are going to be feasible, are going to actually solve some of the problems, are going to be cost, what are their costs, how easy are they to implement. And so that when we actually come to roll these recommendations out to the sector, we will have from your collective experience a better idea of which ones that we should put at the bottom of the list and which ones we should put towards the top of the list in recommendations. So that when we do come to a set of recommendations from this conference, we have as much confidence as we can that these are reasonable, useful interventions that could help address the risks we've identified. This conference isn't the last part of this research. We have a number of other pieces coming which address some really knotty parts of trucking, such as driving and vibration. We won't be addressing those very much today. We have other work that will be addressing those in the last phases of this conference. So certainly ask us about things that you think are important, but we may not be able to give you the answers to everything. That's what we have planned for you. I think we have an interesting day, and we really want to hear your questions and your input into this. There will be some space at the end of each presentation for questions, but because we have video, we would ask that you grab a microphone that we'll hand around so that everybody can hear the questions and the answers. So I'd like to introduce Michael Burke from THSAO to give you a welcome and an orientation from THSAO. Michael.
Thank you very much, Richard, and welcome everyone. And I'd like to express my appreciation to CRE for their efforts in putting this together. We very much value the partnership we have with them and the collective efforts that we develop. And today's an example of that. So our appreciation goes out to all of you for showing up today. It looks like we have a pretty full house. So I think that's a demonstration of the interest that we have in this issue, and I hope you enjoy the conference. Now, when we did something like this a while back, Dee had put me on the panel, and I did such a good job that, as you can see, my role's been somewhat modified today. So I'm sure you're going to hear from people who are very well versed in this issue and probably can give you a little more insight than I did. I'd like to recognize a few people that are here today. We have a few members of the THSAO board. We have Joe Libralesso. We have Bud McCauley. We have our chair, Ian Wisdom. And we have a former board member, the Right Honorable Vic Pekelnis, who's now an esteemed professor at Queen's University, and he came out all this way just to help us out today, so it's great to see Vic again. Now, I'm going to introduce the Honorable Steve Mahoney in a few moments. He's chair of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, and he agreed to come out and help us kick this off, and he'll be handing out a few awards in a few moments. But before I do that, I've got a public service announcement. Some of you may have been involved back in November in a road safety summit that the WSIB Prevention Department sponsored and put on, and we were involved in. We thought it went reasonably well. I mean, obviously what we want to do when we engage in these sort of activities is make sure we respect everybody's time and commitment and come out with a result that we think is meaningful, because, you know, many of us have been engaged in these sort of activities, and, you know, there's a lot of discussion, and that's where it stops. So we want to see how we can benefit from the discussions we had last time. I think we did a good job of identifying issues to proceed with, both with respect to commercial vehicles and passenger vehicles as a whole. The Prevention Department would very much like to do another summit, and we'd like to encourage greater participation. But again, we've got to strategize about how we do this properly, how we proceed effectively. We don't want to bring people back and just have the same discussion we had in November. So everybody who's organizing this is very mindful of that. But again, if you'd like to participate in a subsequent road safety summit, if you could maybe leave your business card or contact information with one of the THSAO staff at the end of the day, we'd appreciate that, and we'd add you to the list. So, like I say, we want to encourage participation, and we want to encourage effective and meaningful and honest dialogue, and determine how we can all collectively, you know, do the right things to make the roads that we all use safer.